In fact, this evening really is very much a sort of explaining some of the terms and some of the processes that are behind your business finances. Because I remember when I first started my business, I really had no idea, because I'd been a teacher for so long. I'd never done a self-assessment, never needed to. And none of my close family were, financial people or in business or anything like that. So I had no sort of point of reference for it, really. So what I'm going to tell you this evening really is coming from what I remember I needed to know when I was at that stage. And even then, a couple of years into my business, there were still things that I wasn't quite sure of. And that was before I did my bookkeeping exam. So, I've got qualifications in self-assessment and things. So I've, done a little bit of learning on this. So I know a little bit about how it all works. I don't bookkeep now. I'm too busy with all the cakes. But obviously, I've got all the knowledge that I had when I did, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go through a few areas that I know people often get confused about. And I'm often giving people advice on or explaining things in the group. So I thought it'd be great just to put it all into one live, really. And I've got my handy whiteboard here if I need to write anything down, because once a teacher, always a teacher, writing things down. So let me scroll back to the top of my notes here. Yeah, so the first thing I was going to explain was HMRC. We often hear talk of HMRC. What is that? HMRC is Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and that is the government department that deals with taxes. Basically, that is the department that makes sure everyone pays their dues, so that there's enough money in the national pot to pay for everything that needs paying for. Basically what it boils down to. So they are the people that you need to register with. I'll come on to that in a second, but that is the department that you're dealing with. They also have some really good helplines in the HMRC. When I first started this business malarkey, I was quite reluctant to phone them up because I thought they'd be sort of loads of stuffy civil servants talking lots of jargon and expecting me to know it all. But they're not like that at all. They are really very helpful people. And dare I say, they are very human. And they get all the issues that you have. So if you're phoning them up with not a Scooby-Doo about what's going on, they will talk you through things. So one thing I would say, if you take anything away from this evening, is don't be afraid to phone them up and get in contact with them, because they really are very helpful. And in certain circumstances, if you've already got your account with the HMRC, which is called the Government Gateway, the person on the other end of the phone, with your permission, can go into your account and see what you've done. And see any issues, so you don't even have to explain things. They can see it there. So it's really, really worth knowing that that's something you can access, and I would recommend that you do, because it's they're very, very helpful. So that's HMRC. So whenever we talk about that, that's who we're talking about. The next thing on my list to talk about, and I'm often talking about this, is the tax year. It's worth knowing what the tax year is and what it's about. Now, the tax year runs from the 6th of April, so we've just started a new tax year, to the 5th of April the following year, and that is a tax year. Now, the reason it's those dates is it's a historical reason. Do Google it if you're interested in that, finding out things like that. But it's not easy to explain in a couple of sentences. It's to do with, a few hundred years ago when they changed the calendar and New Year's Day was on a different day and all sorts of things. But it's sort of settled on those were the dates for the financial year, and it's never changed since then. So that's why it's weird dates, you know. If you were starting from scratch, you wouldn't pick those dates, would you? But that's what it is. So start thinking about tax year, your finances for your business. Think about those brackets of that tax year. Okay. And when you are telling the HMRC about your business and its money, they want to know about it within that bracket of that tax year. Okay. So it's worth remembering that, because you will need to sort of total up at the end of the tax year, and that's where you get your totals that you submit to them when you're telling them about how much money you've earned. And then for the new tax year, you need to start again at zero and start adding up again from there. So each tax year you have different totals and amounts for. Okay. Now, you might notice if you're also employed, which I know a lot of home bakers are, you might notice on your pay slips, we'll talk about pay as you earn in a minute, but you might notice on your pay slips that when you get to April, you might have on your pay slip somewhere something that might say tax period or something to that effect. And depending on how regularly you are paid, so as a teacher, I used to be paid monthly. So the April pay slip had 1 on it. The May one had 2 on it, and so on, until I got to the following March where I had 12. And you will also notice on your pay slips that it will accumulate the amount of money you've earned in that tax year. So your first pay slip in April, the cumulative amount that you've earned will just be the amount from that pay slip. Your second pay slip will then add together, and it should also add up the amount of tax you've paid. So as you go through the year, you can see on your pay slip how much money you've been paid in total for that year and how much tax you've paid. So that's why it does that, because it's talking again about a tax year. I do that. Those are the brackets for the tax year. Okay. So come on, we'll talk a little bit more about pay slips and pay as you earn in a minute, because that can, for a lot of home bakers who also have jobs, that can be confusing. So I'll explain that as well. The other term that you need to know is your income, and the term gross income. Now, gross in recent years has come to be to mean sort of something that's horrible and revolting, but the original meaning of that word just means something that's total, the gross amount of something, and it comes from an old measurement, I think, a gross of something. So your gross income is your income, your raw income, if you like, without anything taken off. So if I get paid £500 for a wedding cake, that £500 is the gross income. Okay. It's also known as revenue. Your revenue is the money that you have in. And another term you might hear is turnover, which is basically the same thing, but often turnover is applied to how much you earn in a year. So your annual turnover. And that means just all the money that you've had into your business. Okay, so those are the terms for any money that you have in. I'm doing this, my hand signals. Any money that you have in, any money that customers have paid you. You know, that's basically where our business income comes from, isn't it? Once you've taken any expenses off, it then becomes net income, and that's where the word net comes in. Someone once described it as you put the money through a net, and what stays in the net is what you keep, if that helps at all. But your net income is what you sort of can keep. Your gross income is everything altogether. So your net income could also be described as your profit, you know, what you're left with when all the expenses are taken off. Okay. So yeah, so profit is the next heading on my list. you have your gross income. So let's say for this wedding cake, it was £500 that I'm paid. That's my gross income. So the expenses that I'm going to spend on that cake, obviously, are the ingredients, the boxes, this, that, and, electricity, this, that, and the other. And once I've taken that off that £500, what I'm left with is my profit. Okay. And when you do your self-assessment, obviously, that's the amount that the HMRC will tax. Come on to that in a second. Okay. So you've got your gross income, which is also known as turnover and revenue. And then once you've taken away your expenses, you've then got your net income or your profit. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about allowances. I'll talk about the hobby allowance in a minute. So park that one for a second. We'll come back to that. This is where sometimes finances can get confusing because there are different types of allowances. And people perhaps new to business and new to finance might get confused between the different types. So first, I'm going to talk about your personal allowance, what's known as your personal allowance. Everybody is allowed to earn, everyone in the UK is allowed to earn up to a certain amount before they have to pay any tax. Okay. Now, most of us, I'm going to get my pens out now so I can write it down. For most of us at the moment, it is 12,570. Can you see that? All right. I'll bring that forward a bit. You can see that a bit better. So there we are. Okay. So 12,570. You can earn up to that amount without paying any tax. Okay. Now, this personal allowance gives you a tax code. So if you've got a pay slip, so if you've also got a job and you've got a pay slip, what you will find, and they don't write it as a sum like that, they just write it, they take the zeros off. You will see tax code, you'll get the number, and you also get a letter as well. If it's L, that just means the basic tax allowance. If your number is different, the chances are you're going to have a different letter there. I won't go into them all now, but there are different ones depending on what your employer knows about you in terms of do they know what tax code you're on? You can have emergency tax codes, for example. I won't go too far into that because it will get confusing. But that's what that number is on your pay slip. It's your tax code. And that tells you that you can earn up to that much before they tax you. Okay. Ooh, put my glasses down. Can't see what I'm reading here. There's also, anything that you earn over that amount. Okay. So if I earned £12,580, this is all a year. If I earned that, that's £10 over, isn't it? Okay. So that is the amount I'd be taxed on. I'd be taxed on £10. Okay. And the basic rate at the moment is 20%. So I'd pay £2 tax on that. Okay. I hope you're still with me on this. Do shout if I get confused. Now, there's also a higher level tax threshold, which some of you, if you've got perhaps full-time jobs, you might get into this threshold. So if you go up to 50,000, what is it? I've written it down. I think it's 270. Yeah. 50,270. Anything between that and that, you pay 20% on. Anything above that, but below 150,000, you pay 40% tax on. Okay. You're not paying 40% tax on everything. You're just paying 40% on anything above that. Okay. And then if you earn over 150k, anything that you earn above 150k is taxed at 45%. Okay, so that's how the tax thresholds work. Okay. If you earn, it may be that you're likely to be in this, so you're likely to be paying 20% tax, and of course some of you might be in that tax threshold as well. Okay, can you see that? I just realized you can't see that. There we are. Okay, so those are the numbers. It's all in my blog, these numbers, so don't worry if you're not getting it all. It'll all be there for you, and it'll all be on the freebie that you can ask for as well. Okay. So if you also have a job, that's why the HMRC want to know how much you've earned, because they want to add your business earnings onto what you've earned in your job, put it in a total, and then see whereabouts on that you come as to how much you're taxed. Okay. So that's thresholds. We'll come on to the hobby threshold in a minute. Okay. The next thing I just wanted to mention is VAT. Often people ask me about that when they start up a business. Now, on the whole, when you start a business, you don't need to worry about VAT, because the threshold for VAT, another threshold, is 85,000 a year. So if your turnover is 85,000 or more, you have to register for VAT. You have to be VAT registered. Below that amount, you can volunteer to be VAT registered. But for most home baking businesses, it's not going to be in your best interest to. If you're wondering whether it is or not, talk to a bookkeeper or an accountant, because they will look at your finances and tell you whether it's worth doing or not. But on the whole, I'd say for smaller home baking businesses, it's not going to be worth it. So if ever you get asked for a VAT receipt or asked for a VAT number, all you do is say, I'm not VAT registered. And that's the end of that. Other businesses, for example, should know that not being VAT registered means that you're not going to have a VAT number and all that kind of stuff. So that's the VAT thing. So on the whole, don't worry about VAT because it doesn't apply. And when you register on the registration form, it does say what's your VAT number. On the whole, you're going to leave that blank because you're not VAT registered. Okay. What's next on my little list? Oh, yes, pay as you earn. I mentioned that earlier. Pay as you earn. I just wanted to explain how that works if you have a job. Because pay as you earn, PAYE, is the system whereby your employer will take the tax or pay the tax for you and then give you what's left. Okay. And generally what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, in a year, you're going to earn this. They'll sort of average it out. Even if you're on a temporary contract or whatever, they'll still generally say, well, if it was a year, you'd get this in a month. And in a year, they look at what your tax threshold is and they sort of average it out. So you pay the same amount of tax each month. They sort of average it out. So generally what doesn't happen is you earn and don't pay any tax until you get to that amount, then you pay tax. It doesn't usually work like that. Okay. And this is why when you start a new job, they will ask you for something called a P45. Now your P45 is from your previous employer, and it tells your new employer what your tax code is. Okay, which on the whole is going to be that. So it may be that if you haven't got a P45, your new employer might put you on an emergency tax code, which means you start off by paying too much tax until they know your circumstances, and then it'll even out. And in your next pay slip, you'll get some back. So it all evens out in the end. Just because you pay too much tax in one month, it's not lost forever. It does even out. and you do get what's due to you. So don't ever think if if your tax bill's wrong that it's lost forever. It's not. They will work it out and they will give it back to you. Okay, so that is what a P45 is. So those are quite useful to have, as is your P60, which is what you get after the end of the tax year. So a lot of you will be getting them now. And your P60 is like a total of what you earned in the last tax year. It has your total that they paid you and the total that they paid the HMRC for you. Okay, and those are the figures that you need for your tax self-assessment if you do one. Okay, so if you get your P60, look after it. Don't, as I used to do, just think, oh, yeah, and sort of file it somewhere and then forget about it. Right, registering with the HMRC. Now, it used to be before, I think it was 2017 is the date I've put on it. I'm fairly sure that's the date. Before 2017, the rule was that if you started a new business, you had to declare or register with the HMRC within so many months. I think it was 3 months, 6 months, however many it was. But in 2017, that changed. What they brought in at that point was this hobby allowance or trading allowance that you often hear tell of. Now, this trading allowance is the amount that you can earn, like in a hobby or a side business. It doesn't matter what you call it, but it's sort of extra money that you can earn. You can earn up to £1,000. That's gross income in a year. Tax brackets. If you earn up to £1,000, the HMRC don't want to know about it. They say, right, you can have that. And I get the impression that it was because anything below that, people were like doing self-assessments and tax returns, and they had lots and lots of people there working out people's tax, and it was coming to like pennies that they owed, or they didn't owe anything at all. So I think they thought, right, we'll put a threshold on this, so it's we'll only get tax returns from people that are more likely to owe us some tax. Yeah, so that's probably why they brought it in. So in the tax year, this is why you need to keep an eye on your income, particularly if you started your business towards the end of the tax year. Okay, because if you haven't had gross income of £1,000 or more, you don't need to register. Okay, if you have already registered, you will need to do the self-assessment because you're then on their radar. Okay, but all you do is tick the trading allowance box. Okay, so that's what that threshold is all about. Okay, hang on, where am I? Scrolling. So if you have earned more than £1,000 gross income in your tax year, what you then need to do is tell the HMRC that that's what's happened, and you do that by registering. And by registering, you get something called a government gateway account, and that has all your tax details on it. If you're employed, it will have all that in there as well. All your information is in there. And via that is where you do your self-assessment. Okay, so you go in there and you do your self-assessment. Now, people often panic about this, but actually you've got quite a lot of time. They give you quite a few months to get yourself sorted and the deadlines. So in a tax year, if the tax year ends at 6th of April, let's have it that one because it's that side, 6th of April, And on 6th of April, you've added up your income and you've had over £1,000. So you're like, right, okay, I've got to register with the HMRC. You've then got until the October the 5th, to tell the HMRC about you, to register with them, to get an account set up. Okay. That's not the deadline that you need to do your self-assessment. That's the deadline for registering with them. It doesn't take very long, actually. And actually, I'd recommend doing it sooner than that. As soon as you know you need to register, then just do it, because it just makes life so much easier. Once you've got your account, and it does take a while to get an account because of security reasons, you get sent numbers and then you get sent another number, and it's all done very carefully. So it takes a while to set that up. And once you have that, you have until the following January to then do your self-assessment and pay anything that you owe them. So there's quite a lot of time. I think this is where some people get confused, because in January comes, people with new businesses see that other people are doing their tax self-assessment. They think, oh, I need to do mine. But actually, if they've just started their business, they don't need to worry until the following year. And that's where it can get a bit confusing, because there's sort of overlap with the deadlines and the tax years and things. So those are the deadlines. Okay. So think about the tax year, right? And remember, when you do your self-assessment, yes, we'll come on to self-assessment now. So your self-assessment, basically you start off, you register, so you've got your account. And there are two ways to do your self-assessment. You can either do it, you can download the forms and actually physically fill them in with a pen and send them off. Not really recommended. The recommended way to do it is online, because it does all the adding up for you and it's instant, and they've got machines that read the numbers and all that kind of stuff. And the deadline is longer if you do it online. So what happens first of all, the first set of questions they ask you is they want to know where your income comes from. So they'll ask you if you're employed. And they'll also ask, if you say yes, they'll say, how many jobs have you got? Or how many different employers have you got? Because each of your employers will have different totals for what they've paid you. Okay. So they'll ask you that. And then they'll ask you, are you self-employed? Or have you earned over £1,000 in any businesses? So the chances are you'll say yes if you're registering. And then it'll ask you how many self-employments you have, because it's £1,000. That £1,000 trading allowance is for any businesses that you have. So if you had 5 businesses, it would still be £1,000 total. So you can't earn, £900 in lots and lots. That's not how it works. So there used to be a time when I was doing my wedding cakes and I was doing my bookkeeping. So I counted those as 2 separate self-employments. And I did the book separately for those. Now I put all my cakey related businesses in just one. I just do it as one. And then that initial form will also ask you if you've got any income from property, any income from any other assets. There's all sorts of different categories that you can get income from, and it'll ask you about that. And then depending on the answers that you give, the next section then, it'll give you forms to fill in. So if you've said you're employed, it'll give you the employment forms to fill in. If you've said you're self-employed, it'll give you those forms to fill in. Okay. Now this year, because I'm no longer employed, I didn't get any any employment forms. I just went straight to the self-employment ones. Okay. So it means you're not looking through and trying to fill in forms that are irrelevant to you. They tailor your self-assessment to what you've said yes to, basically, which makes life slightly easier. And it's also worth remembering that with these self-assessment forms, each of the forms has a really good set of notes written in understandable English that go with them as well. And so it's worth remembering those. Even though I'm fairly experienced in this, every year I still look through the notes just to double check that, you know, I'm putting things in the right place and answering the right thing. Because sometimes year on year, things can change ever so slightly as well with the, you know, thresholds and things. When it comes to budget, you know, the government budget, the red box and everything, sometimes they change this amount, the allowance, and they'll change this amount. They might change the hobby allowance amount. So all those kind of figures are decided in those budgets. They usually take sort of a year to kick in, but that's when those numbers are changed. So, where are we? I think we've come to the end of all the bits I was going to tell you. So basically, to round off, to sum up, if you started your business after, use my hands again, after the 6th of April last year, 2021, if you started your business after then, you need to look at your income up to the 5th of April this year in that, you know, that tax year bracket. If your gross income is more than 1,000, you now need to register and to get your self-assessment sorted out. Okay. If you perhaps started your business at the beginning of this calendar year, so January, February, and by April the 5th, you didn't have £1,000 coming in, then you don't need to worry for this year. You just look at this current tax year and do it all next year. Okay. And then again, the various deadlines, just be aware of the various deadlines. There are various fines that will happen if you don't do things in time, but you have so much leeway. They give you so many months now. And that's why I say do it sooner rather than later. Because if you come unstuck with something and you're not sure what to answer, you've got time to perhaps phone them up or look at the notes, or, you know, and you're not panicking that you'll be too late. So get it done sooner rather than later is my advice on that one. Now I have put together a guide to all this. I've got it's sort of a graphic of how the tax year works, and how to decide whether you need to register or not. And I've also put all these terms that I've talked about this evening on there. So you can have that to refer to if you want to. And if you would like that, hang on, let me find my buttons. If you would like that, and I'll put the link to this in the group in a minute, but you go here to this link here, and my little jolly old face will pop up, and it'll ask you just to put your email in, and then I will have it sent to you, this guide. Okay, and you can have it to keep, put it on your computer or whatever, and have it to keep, and you can refer to it. Okay, so I'll put that link in the group as well, so you don't need to remember it or write it down or anything. I'll put that in the group. And the other thing to remember is that, you know, the group is here. If you need me to answer any questions, I'm happy to. Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I'm happy to answer questions. I can't really go into in details about different situations because there are so many different, you know, variations and computations about how things work. I'll point you in the right direction if I can't help you, or if it's, you know, if it's quite a lengthy thing that I can't, you know, do in a few seconds. Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. But say use all the help that's out there as well. Say phone up the HMRC. Please don't be afraid to phone them up, because they're very helpful. They're very human, and they get what issues you might have, and they'll talk to you without, you know, jargoning at you and expecting you to know this, that, and the other. So yeah, don't be afraid to phone them. Honestly, my daughter had to phone them at one point because her tax code was wrong, and they were really good and sort of talked her through what she needed to know and what she needed to information she needed to go and find, and phone us back when you've got it, all that kind of stuff. So I heartily recommend you use that service because it's there for you to use. Okie dokie. So I hope that's been useful. Just give you some, some of the words that's often used. So when I first started, I had no idea what gross income was. I had no idea what PAYE was, and once you start to know and understand some of these terms, it does make things feel slightly less frightening, doesn't it? Slightly less scary. Say, oh yeah, I remember Annie talking about that. That's I can cope with that. So look out for the post with the link. I'll put that in within the next 15 minutes. And if I can help at all, do ask. I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction if you need to. All right. So have a good evening. Have a good week. What am I talking about next week? Next week I'm going to do some basics on terms and conditions. We often talk about that. Oh, excuse me. In the group, usually when people have issues with customers and things, and people say, have you got it in your terms and conditions? So I'll talk a bit about basic things you need to know about terms and conditions. That will be next week's waffle. Okay. So have a good week. Till then, let's fingers crossed that the weather is nice and summery so I can use my garden that's just been tidied by my daughter. Gotta love her. And I will see you next week. All right. Take care, everybody. And I will see you next Wednesday. Toodaloo.